Good afternoon, or is it morning or afternoon?
I think it's morning.
Okay, good morning. Well, I want to let everybody know this man is not going to brag about himself. He's one of the most humble guys I've met in my entire life. And my experience is going to, what I'm going to speak to you today and what I'm going to talk about, I've experienced on a personal level, not only through business, but also in my family. And I want you to kind of buckle up because there's a list a mile long of the things that he's been able to do. So I had to have them written because I couldn't remember every single one of them. And I have the coolest friends in the entire world, and Dale is one of them. So Dale spent most of his career leading large groups of people in multiple different countries and cultures. The reason why I'm telling you this too is to be able to give context on our conversation today and to be able to help you to understand that this is not just a talking head. This is not a theory that he has. It's something that he lives every single day and has exceeded expectations at the highest levels. So he's been the global sourcing senior executive and general manager for a global staff of over 500 people. He's had GMs in Asia, in Eastern and Western Europe, North America, South America. He got promoted to president and CEO of GE Clinical Services. He was the COO of United Healthcare, and he retired in the corporate world because his wife told him to.
And she's out there. Obviously.
She is. Kimberlyn knows this too. I know Kimberlyn, and it's amazing. And the thing that I want to pose to you, it's going to be more of a statement, is honestly, whatever organization you have right now and wherever you're at, there's not an organization in this room right now that doesn't want to make and increase more profit and add massive value to your guests. And when I say that, it's an emphatic statement because I don't know any business or any organization that would come to me and be like, I don't want to profit more. I don't want to add massive value to my guests. We're going to be talking about diversity. And can you give this guy a round of applause? Because I just think Dale Jones is a...
Thank you.
Dale, we're going to be talking about diversity, but I think it's important for us to define diversity first.
Yeah, back in the day, and I go back to the 90s, next week I'll be 60 years old. Can you believe that?
You're going to get a discount at Denny's.
Yes. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, back in the day when we talked about diversity, it was more about cultural diversity and how do we bring inclusion to the workplace. But today, as we look at diversity, it's really about cognitive diversity, right? How do we have diversity of thought in our workplace to make sure that we're bringing people in that have different perspective than ourselves? And so one of the things that I've experienced in bringing in more cognitive or thought diversity is that I get it all, right? And so it's not just the surface level diversity where we're talking about gender or race or nationality or age, but now we're talking about people's personalities, their worldview, all of those things that are much deeper. And again, you cover such a broader perspective. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk more about cognitive diversity.
Well, I love this too, Dale, because the cognitive diversity, I've experienced it with you on the thought process. I've told you all throughout our friendship, which has lasted over 20 years, and I've told you that you've constantly expanded my mind and got me in trouble too.
I love it.
There was a time when I came, and Kimberlyn, you're in trouble for this too. I came to the house, I stayed with you guys. There was a basket for me with my favorite lemonade inside of it. And when you brought on this type of mentality, it made me feel bad about myself because I don't do that for my guests, and I still don't, so I'm a bad person. When I went home, there was a drive that really changed things for me too. As we drove, and when we drove in your car had inflating seats that held me in the seat because everyone needs that. And I went home, and my wife got mad at you because I actually had to buy that car because I had experienced something on a different level. Can you talk to that as far as the cognitive part, thinking different, but also experiencing different, because that's what you're showing in your businesses? Yeah,
and I think for me, having spent time more in a global setting, for me, having a global perspective really broaden your view of not only the world, but of also your business. And so how do you be successful in your organization by really broadening how you deal with people, right? And so how you treat people, because again, if you go to whether it's Asia or in Mexico, different cultures altogether, and you experience so much difference in the various culture. And I bring that also to my home and make sure that I treat people the way that I've been treated in a very unique way.
But it does get you in trouble, though. So if you do go and visit Dale and Kimberlyn, you're going to have experiences that will expand your mind, will expand your heart, and help. But it makes me feel guilty every single time that I have a person over. So thank you for that, Dale. I appreciate it. What about your experience in leading diverse groups? Can you talk to that?
Yeah, let's talk about diversity. I've spent, I think about my career. I've spent about 15 years with GE. And about 5 years with United Healthcare, and I've now been with Paul Mitchell, the school. Where are my Paul Mitchell friends? Yes, for the past 16 years. And in every area, I've found that diversity really works, right? And so for me, when I led, we had a plant in Tennessee, I think it was in Smyrna, Tennessee. And we started that plant. The plant was pretty old, but I started with that plant about after 25 years of existence. And so very old, very traditional plant. And my boss told me, when you go in, Dale, just please don't mess it up, right? And so go in and keep everything status quo and we'll be good, right? But that's not me, right? And so we went in and really brought in a team of people and expanded the business dramatically. So we were doing about $50 million in sales. And we expanded that to about $100 million, right? With a stronger team of people that had different perspective. We went from 85% customer satisfaction to 97% customer satisfaction. So again, with a very diverse people, you've got different perspective, and we're able to grow much faster. And so when I worked for the sourcing group of GE, we had about $3.5 billion of material that we had to source across the world. We improved, actually, the first thing we improved was the staffing, right? And we were able to repatriate people from overseas back to the United States and actually hire people in Asia and Mexico and different places. Because typically back in the day, usually your GM in different countries were us, right? So from the United States, white guys from the United States, you'll see them in Mexico and Asia and different places. And so one of the things that I did was to make sure that we're hiring the nationalities that understood the culture in that country, right? And the dramatic shift that we made, we saw about a 35% reduction in costs. We saw about a 10% reduction in material costs, 10% against $3.5 billion. It's a lot of money, right? And so, of course, we won the Sourcing GM of the Year award for that. But again, it was all about the team. Then when I worked with GE Clinical Services, presidency of GE Clinical Services, we actually improved that company from about it was about $250 million to $500 million in a very short period of time. So again, it was the team that was at work, right? Bringing different perspective to the conversation. And it really doesn't matter what industry that you're in. I'm now with Paul Mitchell, the school, and I do hair, right? So engineer to hair. Oh, never mind. So again, I'm going to blame my wife for that, right? But again, it's not the industry. It's all about the concept and the processes and how do you bring those leadership to whatever that you're doing.
Dale, can we talk about a hot button?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The hot
Which
button,
one?
The hot button is cultural diversity. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting because you and I had a conversation the other day, mm-hmm. and I literally take notes. I probably have 14 pages of notes every time we talk. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you think I'm not listening to you. Mm-hmm. It's just that I'm writing so fast because you're dropping so much wisdom. Mm-hmm. You told me that there's a couple of things where people should not diversify their mm-hmm. culture. Yeah. When is that?
Well, sometimes when people come to me and says, okay, I want to diversify, and I'll ask them why, right? Because sometimes you're not ready for diversification. And so if there's not a business imperative for doing any change, fact of the matter, right? If there's not a business imperative to make that change, then I recommend people not do that, right? Because whatever change agenda that you're driving, the reason for change have got to be more compelling than the resistance to change, right? You're going to have that inherent resistance to change, right? But your reasoning and your business imperative is going to drive everything else. So if you got the right business imperative to do so, then let's get started, right? But if you do not, then I recommend people not even to go down that path.
Can you give us an example of a company that ran to it? Because I think a lot of us ran to this, especially pandemic time.
Yeah.
Everyone ran to and said, okay, we got all these things shifting in our country and our world. We just need to run out. We need to do exactly what everybody is doing, and they hurt themselves in the process.
Yeah, think about what we're talking about today. And so we're talking about, that our industry is going to become even more competitive. And so not only competitive in terms of the number of students that we're going to attract, but competitive in terms of the staff. How many of you guys dealing with staff shortages out there? Right?
If you don't
Everybody,
raise your
right?
hand, you're not allowed.
Right? And so if you're going to play in any demographics, you want to make sure that you're looking like the demographics that you're in. Right? And so for me, if I'm going to play in a particular area, I'm going out looking at, is it 60% of one group of people or the other, right? And I want to make sure that I'm playing with 100%, right? And not, having handcuffs behind my back because I won't change my perspective. And so for me, whatever you're playing in, make sure that you're playing with full deck rather than just a half a deck. Yeah.
So I think one of the biggest questions too is that with the cognitive diversity, how do we get there? Like, how do we start this process?
Yeah. Well, with any change management, you really want to start again with that business imperative. And then you want to create a group of people, if you are going to make massive change in your organization, to make sure that you have a group of people that you assemble that's going to manage that change for you. Those are what I call your change champions, right? And then you want to create a vision. What does the organization look like when you're done? What's the mission statement, right? And you may have to create something different in terms of your mission statement. And then what's the culture, right? So important. Most companies really do not think about culture when they're creating their vision and their mission statements. And the truth of the matter is that culture will eat your vision for breakfast. It will. If you Can
you say that one more time?
Yeah.
Please write this down.
Yeah. Right?
Please write down this part that he's about to say right now. Say it slow, because you drop bombs.
So culture will eat your vision for breakfast, right? Because if your culture is not in alignment with where you're going, then that culture will destroy whatever vision or whatever mission that you're thinking about. And so it's so important that you develop the right culture, because when you have diverse people come into your organization, they need to feel psychologically safe. Right, to share their views, to share their thoughts, to share their ideas. And if there is not that psychological safety, then you'll get the diverse people in your organization, but they will not make the impact on your organization.
Can you give us an example of that? Because when you talk about feeling safe, I mean, and in that diversity, can you give us an example of it? And if my son, who's Maddox, his birthday is tomorrow, so that's a shout out to him. He's turning 11. If he was sitting in here, he's in 5th grade. He's really handsome too, by the way.
Yeah, like his dad, right?
If he was sitting right there and he had to understand what this concept was, how would you explain it to him?
Well, I'll give you a perfect example. So when I came to Paul Mitchell, I'm not a hairdresser, right? And so you can tell he's a hairdresser. I'm not a hairdresser.
Used to be.
And so talking about diversity, right? So I'm in a space that I don't do the things that everybody's doing, but I bring a different perspective to it. And so for me, when I first got there, I was kind of just hanging back, not really engaging. And I had one of the senior executive in the company came to me after a break, similar to this one, and he said to me, "Dale, you're hanging back. I know you've got more to share, and you're not really engaging. And so we really need to hear your perspective." That engaged me, that empowered me in that moment to know that my ideas were important, right? And that they needed to hear from me, even though I wasn't a hairdresser. They wanted to know from a business perspective, how do we shift the game entirely? And so for me, just having that support from the senior executive was huge for me to engage. And so, Paul Mitchell is really replete with that kind of stuff. Their culture is just incredible and amazing. And one of the things that they do is to support different views and different ideas. And so that to me then opened up, have you considered? And that's usually the way that I start. Have you considered this, right? Yes. And to start shaping the conversation about how do we shift from what we're doing and go into a different direction. So,
are we allowed to rewind?
What do you mean?
Just to go back, I want to go back to a point, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
The business imperative part. I would love for you to break that down and maybe give us a couple of examples, because again, that's a 30,000 foot view.
Sure.
Business imperative. But let's look at the bare bones of it, or the starting point, because I think a lot of times our start stops us.
Yeah.
We have all these great ideas, but where do I begin with it? So could you break down imperative as if Maddox was sitting?
Yeah, right, and again, so for me, business imperative is really understanding how do you move your company forward, and why is this important for your company right now, right? Usually businesses are in peril and they don't even know it, right? And so right now, as we're in this conference, we're talking about some of the shifting dynamics in our world, in our market. And so the question is, what's the business imperative? What are you going to do differently tomorrow than you have done today to make your business relevant, right? And so when I talk about business imperative, this is, if you don't change, your doors will close, right? And so for me, it's all about making sure that you're keeping your company as relevant as it needs to be, so that you're adding the maximum value to your customers. And so that's what I really mean by that.
So now I believe that, and I can speak for all of us, I'm going to do that. We understand what diversity is, that there's a cognitive and there's a cultural, and we have to understand the difference between the two. We understand that, how to be able to get it moving, where to get started. The tough part for all of us is to be able to sustain it.
Yeah.
It's always good, like every single one of us probably made on January 1st, we got really excited about going to the gym. Right. And then by January 14th, we were all donating to that same gym by not going and still paying our tuition. How can a company continue to sustain a culture of diversity?
Yeah, one of my mentors used to tell me, he says, don't hire smart people and give them dumb things to do, right?
Write that down.
Right. So,
Say it again.
Says,
slow.
Don't hire smart people and give them dumb things to do. They won't stay, right? And so, again, if you're going to sustain cultural diversity or cognitive diversity in your organization, again, it's all about creating the right environment. I spoke about Paul Mitchell, and I'll give a shout out to Win Clayball. He's an incredible, incredible leader. And in our culture, if you go to our school, we've got all of these posters up, and they're not just decorative posters. They're really all about how do we make sure that we keep our culture visible in our organization so that people understand the cultural tenets. So we have our golden rules, right? Things like always be in a great mood. Things like the 24-hour rule, right? We want to resolve any challenges within 24 hours. Things like go and asking rather than go and accusing. And I tell people, if you go and accuse somebody of something, there is no place to go. There's no place to retreat. But if you go and ask them, then it engenders a conversation.
And Dale,
right?
You've done this with me. I've screwed up in your company at times. I have, majorly. And Dale has taken me in the office, and it is horrible. But you've went in asking, and you were kind, and you asked me how I could make it better. And I've experienced these things, again, on a personal level, and in a professional level, too. And I can speak to it, and I just want to tell you that it's amazing.
Yeah, good stuff. Another thing we do, we have a gathering guideline. And our gathering guideline is all about making, again, as people gather to talk about problems and offering up solution, that people feel empowered in that moment to offer the solutions that are relevant to what we're trying to do. And so we encourage people to be empowered. We want people to understand that they are safe in our environment. And so creating, again, I talked about psychological safety, creating a safe environment for people to be in, and also to make sure that they have a sense of belonging. And so all of those things, in my opinion, really creates a sustaining culture for that kind of diversity, right? Where people want to hang out with you, where people feel that they're contributing to your organization. Because if people stop feeling that they're contributing, then they won't hang out for very long. Not the smart one. Right?
So how easy is it to fall into the lack of diversity in a company? Because a lot of times we get going and we have so many things. We're thinking about whether it be the tuitions, we're thinking about the top line revenue, we're thinking about all these things. Right. And how quickly can a company fall into the peril that you spoke about?
Yeah, well, let's think about it. We tend to hang out with people who shares the same perspective that we do, right? And share the same kind of worldview and everything else like that. And so it's so comfortable for us to just be with people. We like people that kind of mirror who we are, right? And so again, if you're not careful and understanding that's what you're doing, then you'll continue to be comfortable in that space. And so you've got to challenge yourself to go beyond your own comfort and make sure that you're doing something that's going to better your organization. And so for me, speaking about worldview and people's attitude, their perspective, their personality, all of those things are so important for me to embrace. And so rather than just feeling comfortable with the status quo, right? Because that's typically when I would go into various organizations. I spent, as I said, 15 years with GE. GE is a multi-billion, $100 billion business, $120 billion business. At the time, we had 13 different sectors that we were playing in. And so I could stay in one company and worked in 13 different industries, from aircraft engines to medical systems to industrial systems and control. But regardless of where we went, it was important that we really assemble people who were thinking different than we were and saw the world in a different perspective, right? Because when you do that, you become much more competitive as an organization, right? We're all trying to create things. We're all trying to become innovative. If we want to be innovative and creative, we really have got to have diverse perspective so that we can be innovative and creative.
So Dale, we can assume that most of the people in the room right now are the leaders in their companies. You're a leader in your company, you're the owner of your company. You help out the owner of your company, who is Kimberly.
I help out.
So it's a lot of times very simple, or sometimes not as tough for the owner to have this type of mentality and have the type of mentality of cognitive diversity and saying that, different thoughts and being able to accept them. I experienced it with you in Nashville. You told me a story, and I'm going to ask in front of a lot of people if I could tell the story, because you have to say yes. Well, that was probably one of my favorite stories about Dale, because you told me about the number 2 draft pick in the NFL. And the number 2 draft pick in the NFL, after he got picked to the greatest team alive, which is the Tennessee Titans, he showed up at your house with his real estate agent, and he said, "I want to buy
that story.
I want to buy your house." And Dale looked at him and smiled very nice and humble and said, "You can't afford it." And the guy was very mad but had to walk away because Dale knew something that this kid didn't know. And come to find out, he didn't have the money. He had to go down the street and into a lot smaller home than what he was wanting to buy at the time. But how do we take that type of mentality? Because you've traveled around the world, and as leaders here, how do these leaders take it back and transfer that type of knowledge and that type of thing when they maybe haven't experienced it, to be able to do it? And the reason why I ask you is because you've been able to take that mentality, you and Kimberlyn, and you've been able to, I experience it in your company. And everyone in your company feels that, even though maybe they haven't had the number 2 draft pick come to their house and get turned down wanting to try and buy their home.
Well, again, I think for me, it's all about making sure that we're passing our knowledge on to the next generation. And this particular kid, again, I spent a whole lot of time, I'm trying to be very nice, and I spent a lot of time actually coaching and mentoring this guy. Right, he was a very successful quarterback at the Titans.
Yes, he was.
And we spent a lot of time just mentoring and bringing him along so that he really can come into his own as a person. One of the things that we talked about was, that you need a team around you, that you can't do this by yourself. When he came from a university. He was Heisman Trophy winner. He also won his championship coming in. And so he felt very good about himself. But coming from college into the NFL, it's quite a different experience. And so trying to help him to understand the importance of really gathering a team of people around him was so important. And so we were able to mentor him and get him to a different space. So.
In a home down the street.
Yeah.
And then also too, with diversity, can you give us quickly the top 3 advantages of diversity, whether it be cultural or cognitive in the business?
All right, we've got 54 seconds.
You got it.
Yeah,
so you got it.
I think that when we talk about purpose of diversity, we talked about it earlier, competitiveness, right? Mm-hmm. And so it makes you much more competitive. It makes you much more innovative as an organization. Makes you much more profitable as an organization, and you'll grow much faster. So yeah, that was said in about 20
seconds. And so let me pose this question to every single one of you, and it comes from Dale and I. Are you a business that wants to increase your profit and add massive value to your guests? Right? I mean, is there anyone that's going to say no? And if it's yes, then diversity is a vital imperative in your organization. And that's with 9 seconds left, Dale.
Yeah.
Can you give him a round of applause? Because I think
you.
this man is an absolute genius. Are we supposed to walk off now?
Yeah, I think we'll go that way.
Deb,
Thank you guys.
Thank you.